Well, I want to welcome all of you to this series of talks on the topic of conversion. Now, conversion is an interesting word in itself. I suppose when a lot of people first hear that, they think, well, I'm into that. I understand this notion of conversion. I've undergone that kind of religious experience myself. Here in the United States, it's a familiar word, especially in Protestant circles. We've had our whole revivalist tradition, going back to the Great Awakening in the 1730s and 40s in the United States, connected with the great theologian Jonathan Edwards. And we have that tradition of the tent meeting, where people are brought together and they feel a strong sense of guilt and sinfulness before God, and then the preacher reminds them of God's great gift of salvation and that grace is available to them. So when some people hear the word conversion, I think they're on to tent meetings or this strong guilt feeling, and I suppose that produces negative reactions in some people. I think in our own Catholic charismatic renewal in the recent past, we've thought more about this word conversion. There's a lot of people who have undergone specific changes in their life, a response to the call of God in which their life has looked very different, and they've changed their behavior, and they've been ready to witness to all of this. So these are, I suppose, some of the positive ways that the word is seen within our culture, and some people are very familiar with conversion, and they're interested to hear more about it. They think of it pretty much as a once-for-all event, something that has occurred and where God has spoken to them in a strong and decisive way, and now they're going to change their life and continue to respond to the promptings of the Spirit. But I think there's a lot of other people who perhaps aren't into that word. Their piety doesn't encompass much thought of conversion. You can think of traditional Catholics who've grown up in the faith and have made their first communion, been confirmed, lived out the Catholic life. They go to Mass regularly and so on. And they think, well, I'm doing pretty well. I try to improve now and then, and I take it all seriously. But they just don't think in terms of conversion at all. And so I believe that we need to draw everybody into this topic, because conversion is really a crucial biblical notion, and it really is, I think, important for understanding the spiritual life. I want to talk about conversion, therefore, in terms of a process of gradual growth in the life of the Spirit, a process in which we become more responsive to the call of the great God, a process in which we try to put on the mind of Christ and try to live our lives more in accord with the message and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. So I think if we begin to talk about conversion not simply as a once-for-all event, but as a process in life of gradually trying to improve, then I think we're all into the topic then. Then I think that that's something that all of us who are serious about the spiritual life can talk about, think about, and get something out of. Now, I think that we should try to see this in a very personal term, because I mean this whole series of talks on conversion to be a self-examination. This is not the kind of talk that one should be listening to and hitting one's spouse in the ribs and saying, listen to this, or you ought to shape up around this point. I envision it more as a personal examination of conscience for all of us. Sort of a systematic way of checking out our lives, seeing how we're doing, see where there's failure and limitation, and especially to get some sense of ideal of how we could do better, how we might make improvement in this whole business of trying to be better Christians. So it is a systematic way of going about that. I mean, I think a lot of us sort of deal with the spiritual life in a haphazard way. We sort of drift along. Now and then we improve. Maybe we take some steps backwards, but we don't think of it in analytic terms. It just sort of happens. Maybe we would say we drift along. Now that can get to an extreme. It can be the kind of extreme where we would wake up someday and say, I've been drifting for years. I haven't taken hold of my life at all. I haven't done anything worthwhile. I've never thought about what my faults are and how I might try to improve. And I think that's a very bad thing. So part of what I would be trying to do through this series of talks is to call us up short for all of those who are tempted to drift in life, to say, ooh, I better take hold, or I better look more closely here, better examine to see how I'm doing, and especially how I might try to make progress in my life. So I need it to be focused back on self. It is an examination of conscience. Now, that's a traditional notion we have. Many people have been in the habit of examining their conscience when they go to bed at night or sometime throughout the day and saying, God, I'm sorry for my sins, and so on. I think that that's a valuable thing. What I'm going to suggest is to put more precision into that, to do it in a more careful and nuanced way, perhaps. So we could think of this whole series of talks as an extended examination of conscience, an opportunity to see especially how we might grow in the spiritual life. Now, if we can all sort of buy into that at this point, if we can feel our way into the topic, then we can proceed. And I think the first thing that I would need to point out is that development is part of our adult life. That sometimes we have this notion that the paradigm of the spiritual life is a little white girl in a white dress making her first communion. You know, that is sort of the height of Christian spirituality. There she is, innocent and pure and good, and that sort of forever after it will be downhill. I think, too, there's another danger in which we would think of the whole developmental process as working through childhood and adolescence up till you're maybe around the age of 21, and then sort of skating through the rest of life with what one has gotten to that point. And what we're learning a lot more these days from the psychologists and various developmental theorists, that there is development in the adult cycle as well. There's process of growth among adults. A lot of times people come to me and they'll say, you know, they're 60 years old and say, well, you know, is there any hope for me? Or I've lived this way for so long, do you think I could possibly change? And I notice I always have an instinctive answer. Of course I think you can change. That's the process of life. We all have that root capacity to grow and to develop. I don't think we're ever imprisoned at any point that we might be at a given time. I think that's one of the messages of the Christian gospel, that our God deals with us in an open way. No matter what doors we've closed, the great God opens some other door that we can go through. There is a process of development. Now, we're learning more about that from the theorists and the people who have done research on this. We're learning that there are about the midlife crisis, for example. That's become very common in the literature. We know more about how older people become interested in religious matters. As one's facing one's death, the great questions of meaning and purpose, the deep religious questions, seem to take on greater significance. So we could do sort of a scientific analysis of that whole adult life cycle. We could do it according to the thought of Erik Erikson, or following out the kinds of thoughts of Piaget and Fowler and Kohlberg, people like that. But whatever theory you follow, the important point I want to make is that there's possibility for growth, that we are in a continuing process, that we are making ourselves to be what we will be forever. Our essence is not fixed and complete. The existentialists really did have a good thought about that. We are creating our own essence. Freedom is the root capacity to shape our being and our personality. To me, that's what gives excitement to life. That's what's neat about it, that we can continue to make this kind of growth. So I suppose this whole series of lectures will make sense only in terms of that root capacity, that sense we have within us to say, yes, I could make progress. Yes, there's more to my life. There's a development that is possible. God opens a future up to me. So that's one premise that we're going to have if all of this is going to make sense. The other premise that we would need to have in mind, I believe, has to do with the fact that we are multi-dimensional creatures. That is, that we are people who function in varying ways. We have, for example, an affective side. We are emotional creatures. We're the kind of people who can get angry and feel joy about life. We know love and we know sorrow. That's part of what we are. And under that heading, I would call us affective creatures. That's in a dimension of who we are. We're also intellectual creatures. We are people who can think and reason. Someone can present us with a problem and we can analyze it. We can do syllogisms, deduce conclusions from premises. We're able to look and synthesize things, pull them together, see patterns and wholes. So we are also intellectual creatures. We're also the kind of people who can say, I was culpably wrong there. Oh, I gossiped when I shouldn't have. I lied. I was not faithful to a relationship. We're also the kind of people who can say, yes, I was obedient. I acted generously in this situation. So we are moral creatures. We have a conscience. We have a sense that we are blameworthy for certain things we do. We say we're culpable. I did that. It's my fault. I'm sorry. And we're also able to say, thank you for the compliment. I think I did do that well. I functioned fine. And we can take praise for that. So in that way, I would say we are moral creatures. And also, we're the kind of people who can look up into a starry night and say, thank you, Lord. We're the kind of people who can fall down on our knees and say, forgive me, Lord, for being off base here. We're the kind of people who can have a sense of awe and wonder about life, where life can seem vast and mysterious and fascinating, as well as being scary. So that in this way I would say we are religious creatures. We're the kind of people who can pray. Now there's a lot of other dimensions to our lives as well. We are imaginative creatures. We have a specific religious life. We respond to beauty. There's a lot of ways you can analyze the human being and our character and nature. But what I want to do through these series of talks is to look at 4 aspects that I tried to talk about there, and to see how we could undergo conversion in those ways. So I want to talk about an affective conversion, an ability to deal better with our emotional life. I want to talk about an intellectual conversion, how we can use our reason better, make better judgments, be more in touch with our experience, be more insightful people. And I want to talk about moral conversion in which we would move from vice to virtue, in which we would look for constructive patterns in our lives and try to build on those things. And I would like to finally talk about religious conversion, especially a Christian conversion, where we hand ourselves over to Jesus Christ, where we try to respond more faithfully to the call of God, where we try to be open to the workings of the Spirit within us, where we try to become more prayerful people, better Christians, more attuned to the message of the gospel. That's a religious conversion. So my whole purpose now is to sort of analyze us under those dimensions. We are affective people, and we need to deal better with our emotions. We are intellectual creatures, and we have to get our reason to function better. We're moral creatures, and we have to increase virtue in our life. And we are religious creatures. We want to become more responsive to the call of the Lord. Now, as I do that, it's really important to realize that these are dimensions and can't be separated out. I never function like a pure head, just an intellect. My emotions are always tied up with what I do. Our religious life has to be connected in with our moral life and our emotional life. We always deal with life as a totality. We come at it as a bodied spirit, as an integrated whole. And all these dimensions are always meshing together in one way or another. And we can't forget that. We respond to the call of God as a total person. We deal with the sorrows and joys of life as an integrated being. There's no way around that. So I'm doing an analysis. I'm cutting us up into parts, so to speak. I'm looking at dimensions of our existence, and in that way trying to understand how we might make progress, but always in terms of a total person response to the call of God. So that's the second premise that I believe is necessary if we're going to do all of this effectively. That is, if we're going to be able to understand this idea of conversion. It is a method of trying to see how we could improve in life, and to do so rather systematically. Now, let me take up the first of these conversion processes, that of the affective conversion, or the emotional conversion. How are we going to deal better with our emotional life? Now, throughout this series, I'm going to be using stories that come to me out of my conversations and my spiritual direction and my counseling. What I always do is ask people if it's all right if I share these stories anonymously, and I've found people are always willing to do that. There's long as if they always say something like, well, if it'll help somebody else, go ahead. And so that is pretty much what I'm going to be doing throughout, taking particular stories of conversion, sort of ordinary, common experiences maybe, and then analyzing them and see what we can all learn about conversion. But remember, it's not to look objectively at somebody else, it's to say, how do I need conversion in my own life? Now, I want to tell a story of a gentleman now. I'm going to call him Bill. And Bill is a person who is very unconverted emotionally when he comes to me. His wife really sends him in to see me, and his wife sets the whole thing up by saying, Bill is not responsive. I mean, he doesn't respond well to me. He doesn't deal well with our kids. He seems like he's dead to me. I get no response out of him. There seems to be no real emotions. I don't think he has any feelings, this man. No, they're all somehow repressed within him. I sometimes wonder if he feels anything at all. And she goes on to tell me that, it's really not good. I mean, he can't speak in any endearing ways to me. She says that I noticed that he can't hug his daughters, doesn't feel free to do that. I asked him to try to talk to our son about sexual matters, and he really just almost couldn't do that. It was just beyond him to speak in any kind of an open way with his own son about sexual questions. So this is the kind of build-up that I get to encountering this particular gentleman. His wife is upset and really sort of sending him in to see me. Now, when I talk to this man, he's a very good and rational and calm and cool and collected fellow. He's a successful man, a professional man, and doing well in his life. However, one begins to see a certain flatness in his whole emotional life. I hear that in his voice and in his responses. They're all very muted. And indeed, as the story goes on, he tells me that he doesn't feel much in life. That what all the things that his wife said are true. He says, I love her, and I think, but he says, I don't know how to express it. He says, for the life of me, I could not bring myself to say somehow, I love you. He said that he said that's true in dealing with my daughters. He says I just don't feel spontaneously like giving them any sort of affection. And he said, in fact, I'm sort of dominated by my work, my life at work, that takes up all of my time. He said I get pretty discouraged about that at times. That's one emotion that he knew. But he says I don't often get excited about it or joyful. And so he says, for me, life is blah. So there's no doubt about it. So we began working together on all of this. We began trying to talk about emotions, trying to see what their importance was. I tried to get him to start writing things down. Whenever he did feel any kind of emotion, I asked him to try to jot it down, be in touch with it, try to examine it a bit and describe it as best that he could. I told him that I wanted, with all the people that he dealt with, to try to listen better to them and try to pick up when they were expressing some emotion and see if he could get in touch with that. So when his wife was really upset or frustrated, that he'd be able to hear that somehow in her voice or respond to it. So I wanted him to just be in touch with this whole general area of emotion. And then I wanted him to sort of program his behavior in some ways. I wanted him to try to pay his wife and his kids honest compliments. I wanted him to look for something that he liked that they did. And I always stressed with him, be honest about it. Don't make it up and just tell her that she looks nice because you think you should. But, if you really have some genuine feeling going, some positive response to people in your family, or at work for that matter as well, then say it. Try to get it out and try to tell the person that you think they're doing a good job, or that you felt something good about how they had conducted themselves. So that would be another way, always trying to get him to express. I tried to get him in our own conversations to tell me more about what he was feeling. So when he'd be talking to me, if I saw any glimmer of emotion, I'd sort of stop and say, well, what are you feeling now? And his general response was, well, I don't know. But then if I would probe after a period of time, then I'd begin to see, well, then he'd be able to tell me a little bit. Well, as time went on, I mean, he began to get better at all of this. I could tell he was looser in talking to me, so over quite a period of time he would be more animated. I could very often stop him and say, you know, what are you feeling now? And he'd be able to get out something about it. He began to be a little more expressive with his wife and with his kids. I think he even tried to talk to his son about sexual matters. He was scared to death, and he began by saying, well, I'm really frightened, or I'm nervous, or this is hard to talk about. And that seemed to break the ice and was really a good thing. There was an interesting thing that came up early in this whole process, and that is the wife told me how she felt at Mass. They were Catholics, used to go to Mass together, and she always wanted him to give her a kiss at the greeting of peace. And he just could not bring himself to show that much emotion and manifest that sense in church. He just couldn't possibly do that. And so he always said that the therapy would be completed on the day at the greeting of peace, when he would spontaneously give his wife a hug and a kiss. And sure enough, the day came when the man was able to do that. And I said, well, I think you're on your own now. You know, I mean, you're able to move forward here, I think, in this whole business of dealing with your emotions. Well, now that story is put in polarized terms. In other words, I've tried to look at a man who was very unconverted emotionally, and then to move into a direction that is very healthy, I think. And that's sort of how I want to look at all of this, because he underwent what I will call an emotional or affective conversion, a change of heart, a turnaround. He did almost a 180 in a sense. You know, he went from being out of touch with his emotions to being able to deal with them. And I think that's the way I would explain affective conversion. It's a moving away from repressing our emotions when we're not even aware of what we're feeling, when we're not even interested in them. We don't even care what we're feeling. It's just sort of there, and we're just totally out of touch. The unconverted person, therefore, suffers from strange and hidden impulses. It's the kind of person who represses their anger all the time and then snaps at people suddenly. And they say, well, I don't know, I'm going to hold my tongue. I'm going to bite my tongue. I'm not going to say anything today. And then, boom, it all comes out for apparently no reason. The emotion is repressed, and therefore it comes out in strange ways. The same token, the person would not know the well springs of their good feelings. The unconverted person wouldn't even know when they're feeling joy, when they're happy, when they're in love, when the heart is soaring. They would be out of touch with the well springs of that emotion as well. They'd be less likely to say, thank you, Lord, for the joyful feelings that I have now. So that the unconverted person is subject to self-deception. They don't really know what's going on in their head. They might be driven by unknown emotions, the jealousy, for example, to just treat someone else terribly, treat them like a non-person, simply out of jealousy, and never really know why they're doing it, subject to self-deception. They would have very little guidance in dealing with depression. When they were down and despairing and in the dark moments, they wouldn't have a clue as to what to do. The unconverted person just says, well, I'm depressed, I feel bad, or they just walk around with a glum look on their face, but they don't have any tools to deal with it because they're not in touch with the emotional life. So also, I guess, finally, the unconverted person would be subject to swings of emotion, would be unable to control any of that, would have not a clue as to what to do when they were down in the depths and then suddenly feeling much better. There would be uncontrollable swings like this. So that's sort of a picture of what the unconverted person would be like. Out of touch with their emotions, repressed, they get in their way, they're not functioning for them, they're not even interested in what they're all about. Now, to undergo an emotional conversion, therefore, is to move to a whole other standpoint, a whole other way of dealing with life. Now, a person is interested in their emotions. Now they want to know what they feel. They want to probe them, get in touch with them. Now they can really experience them. So if they're angry, they can really feel angry. They can let it come. They don't have to push it down. When there's joy, they can let it come out and feel it and express it and tell their friends about it and their family. Now they understand what the emotions are all about. They know something of what causes them. They're able to name them sort of precisely. And they're able to accept them. They're able to say, yes, I'm jealous of her, but I'm not going to let that make me treat her in a non-civil way. I'm jealous, I know it, I accept that. And not only that, but someone would be able to critique their emotions. This converted person can look at their emotions and say, is it appropriate or not? So there's a tiny slight that someone says, they don't say hello to one, and one's mad at them for the next 3 days because they didn't say hello. And well, one would say, that anger is inappropriate. The converted person's able to say that. It does not make sense to be angry about that. I got to get at the bottom of this. Why am I bent out of shape over whatever has happened here? So they're able to critique their emotion. And finally, they're able to mobilize emotions for action. They're able to get their emotions to work for them. So maybe someone's sort of timid, and they're angry about the fact that someone else hasn't dealt with them correctly, and they use that anger to motivate them to get into action and to confront the person and say, I am upset with what happened. I am not happy with how this relationship is going. And they, in other words, they've mobilized their anger now to work for them rather than against them. And that, again, seems to be a really healthy thing. So the converted person now knows their emotions, they're interested in them, they understand something about them, they've accepted their emotions, criticized them properly, whether they're appropriate or not, and now have mobilized them to work for them. So I believe that this is, really a valuable kind of thing to learn in life. Now, I think what I'm going to do at this point is suggest that we just pause for a couple of minutes and give people an opportunity to think about this, because I've tried to set the stage for saying, am I in touch with my emotions or not? Am I really, where do I stand on the spectrum from being unconverted to being converted? Which of my emotions am I out of touch with? So I think it'd be good here either to a minute or two of personal reflection or a group activity of saying, how are we doing with our emotions? So let's just take a little bit of time to do that now. I imagine some of you found in your discussions there that perhaps you are not all that interested in your feelings, that maybe you found out that you're not sure if your emotions are all that important, that whether you want to be in touch with them or not. And so maybe I ought to address that kind of question. I'm sure that's not a common experience, but I know there's some people who end up thinking along that line. And I'll remind you that our emotions are so important for our life. They're what gives zest and the chemistry to life. They're what keep us going. They make life interesting. They direct our attention and so on. You realize that a lot of times our initial response to experiences in life, our initial emotional response, guides our next steps. So, for example, we meet a person and we have an instant positive, warm reaction to them, a good feeling. And because of that, we want to pursue the conversation. Because of that, maybe we get together and talk again. Before long, we may well be friends. Precisely because I've responded to that initial, intuitive, warm feeling about the other person. And so very often our original emotions help us. Maybe sometimes we feel disgust as we begin to fantasize about various options in life. We might say, boy, I don't want that. I don't want to act like that. We have a disgust about, well, I wouldn't even like myself if I acted like that. We have an immediate clue as to morally what we ought to be doing and what we ought to be trying to do. So what I'm saying is that there's an initial response to the very worth of things and of people that we meet in our lives that are so important, and it's good to be in touch with those kinds of feelings. Another thing that our feelings do for us is help focus our thinking and acting. Let me give you an example of that. Suppose somebody has a real revulsion about nuclear warfare. They have a great actual fear of the nuclear holocaust. And of course there are a lot of people exactly with that feeling. Now what some people would be able to do is to take that feeling and translate it into action. So I know people, because of their fear, which many people would say is a negative emotion, have become tremendous peacemakers. They've been very involved in the peace movement precisely because they fear a nuclear holocaust for themselves, their family, their children, the people they love. Here would be a strong emotion that we usually generally think is somehow debilitating or harmful.